Hi there, welcome back to my channel. Today I am going to be filming my September wrap-up video. This is super exciting because I almost never do a wrap-up. In September I read 12 books and I DNF'd a further 3 books. Now usually I don't talk about the books that I don't finish. For the purposes of did not finish, I am including only books that I got a significant portion of the way through. The first book that I didn't finish, and I want to start with these, is Burnout by Emily and Amelia Nagoski. I had such high hopes for this book. It's a nonfiction book about burnout, specifically in women. They decided to write it specifically about how constant fear leads to burnout in women, and then they went on to describe fear in such a way that, I mean, I've never been triggered by a non-fiction book before, but now I have, and it's not a fun feeling. If you have PTSD, don't read this book. It was not well thought out. The second book that I started but didn't finish is actually a huge letdown. The Rook by Daniel O'Malley is one of my favorite reads of this year. I loved the style, I loved the world, I loved the complexity of the plot. I just loved this book and breezed right through it, so I tried to pick up a sequel, which is Stiletto. The premise of The Rook is that the main character, Miffany Thomas, loses her memory. The entire book is the new Miffany Thomas's experiences trying to fill the shoes of the old Miffany Thomas, led by her letters and documents. So where there's a lot of info dumping in these letters, it feels really organic. In the sequel, it's not written in the same way. It's largely not about Miffany Thomas. Although the world building is still very interesting, the author just has chapters of backstory and info dump, and I couldn't get through it. In my world, Stiletto does not exist. The Rook is a standalone novel, it ends as a standalone novel, and that's it. I'm not, The third book that I didn't finish is The Handmaid's Tale. That's a personal one. I read it, I'm gonna say about 15 years ago, and I absolutely loved it. I consider it to be classic dystopian fiction. However, I am not in a good place, so I've decided that I'm not going to continue reading The Handmaid's Tale, and I'm not going to read the Testaments. Now on to the books that I did read. The 12 books that I did read, I'm so pleased with my progress. This past month I had a fantastic reading month. I started it absolutely brilliantly with The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty, and I read this in audio. The audiobook is read by Sunila Nankani, which basically solidified her as one of my favorite narrators, while at the same time exposing me to a new series and a new author that I really love. You should read The City of Brass if you like fantasy worlds, really different in terms of setting, and at the same time it's got so much political intrigue, and she's a little bit out of her depth, fish out of water. The second book that I read was a graphic novel. It was One Punch Man Volume 8. I absolutely love the One Punch Man anime and mangas. The third book was the r/fantasy HEA book club pick for September, and it was an Enchantment of Ravens by Margaret Rogerson. It is a young adult fantasy, and I was lukewarm about this one. I found that the romance aspect felt kind of forced, and I wasn't really all that interested in the world. However, I liked it enough that I will be going to pick out her second book because I've heard that it is much stronger than this one. That being said, you should read an Enchantment of Ravens if you like inhuman fae characters and if you like first-person point of view. The next book that I read was How To by Randall Munroe. This is a book that just came out, and I really liked it. Not as much as What If. I'm definitely more of a fan of the whimsy in What If as opposed to How To. For those who don't really know what these books are about, What If answers fan questions for things like what would happen if you threw a baseball at 90% the speed of light. Versus How To is the author coming up with weird scenarios from his mind, which a lot of them are really interesting, like how to build a lava moat. Really? I mean, it was really amusing, but some of them are just kind of mundane. You should read this book if you like to learn things framed in really weird, hilarious ways. The next book that I read was Wind from a Foreign Sky. I have this in one of my reading vlogs. I will link it in the description. This is a favorite from when I was a teenager, and I reread it and I still loved it, so I am gratified. If you like the European-esque fantasy that has a very interesting magic system that is drawn from the gods themselves, and court intrigue, and lots of danger and action, then you should definitely pick up this series. I read Alice in Wonderland by Lewis Carroll. I'm lukewarm about it. I will be reading this book again if I had a child to read it to. Definitely read this book if you like classic children's literature. The next book I read, and that is also in a reading vlog, I will link that too, is The Magnolia Sword by Sherry Thomas. And oh my goodness, this book is so incredible. It is a Mulan retelling. So read this book if you like Mulan retellings, period. Read this book if you like ancient China. Read this book if you like really great romantic tension, as well as action and a little bit of political intrigue. And I just couldn't get enough. I loved so many things about it, and I discuss it in length in that vlog, so I'm going to link it rather than take up this entire video with this book. It's really hard to choose my favorite this month because I loved so many of them, but this is definitely a top contender. The other top contender is Play It Again by Aidan Wayne. I read this on the train ride back, cover to cover, and it is just so cute and happy and soft. I was saying earlier in this video how I am just not in the right mind space for dystopian. Well, if you are also not in the right mind space for dystopian, read this book. It's so warm and fuzzy. This is about two YouTubers who fall in love largely over DM and phone calls, and it is just so beautiful and happy, and I love the asexual representation in this book. It's everything. The next book I finished was Homo Deus. This is another book that felt a little bit short for me, but only because it reiterates so much of what he had in Sapiens. It's a book that I found really got my attention at the beginning and got my attention just before the end because the last chapter is just a recap that I skipped. And then the middle, it kind of lost me for a little while. I would say read this book if you have not read Sapiens, and if you prefer thinking about future technology rather than learning about the history of humankind. The next two books I read were novellas in the same series. The Rogue Queen series by Jessie Mihalik. The first book is called The Queen's Gambit, and the second one is The Queen's Advantage. And I'm going to talk about those two as a whole because the first one definitely does not stand on its own. And I feel like it didn't end with enough of a happy for now for me to be satisfied with the romantic relationship. However, combined, I liked them a lot. I read them one after another, back to back, and I found that the science fiction world was very interesting, and I did like the romantic progression, specifically in the second one, The Queen's Advantage. I loved the political intrigue, and the action is on point, and it's got a lot to offer in itty-bitty portion size, and I can't wait for the third installment because it seems like this is an ongoing series. And the 12th book that I read in September is Polaris Rising. I read this one over the weekend. It is so incredible. I've read it before. If you were going to read only one Jessie Mihalik book, it should definitely be Polaris Rising. It has a lot of romantic tension. It has a lot of political intrigue. It has a lot of action. It's got great sci-fi world building. It's got the whole package, and I can't wait for this series to continue. Unlike with the Rogue Queen, it's with different point of view characters in each book, so each couple gets their own happy ending or happy for now ending in each book. So I can feel like I'm satisfied with the way this book ended, Polaris Rising, and move on to the second book, which is from her sister Bianca's point of view. And I love Bianca as a character, so I am super excited. Like, I can't tell you how excited I am. I might just stay up until midnight so I can start reading this book right away. That's how excited I am. That was my September wrap-up. 12 books, 1 month. What? Now, I don't really do TBRs because I am such a mood reader, but I will mention that aside from wanting to read Aurora Blazing as soon as it comes out, I'm also going to be reading A Tremor in the Bitter Earth by Kasia Riemann, which is the sequel to A Wind from the Foreign Sky. Other than that, I feel like I'm in a really spooky mood. If you have recommendations for spooky books that are not scary, because I get nightmares, feel free to leave them in the comments, please. I was thinking of maybe picking up Hester Fox's new book. Last year I read The Witch of Willow Hall, and it's got the really spooky, paranormal elements vibe to it that I really enjoyed. Her current release is The Widow of Pale Harbor, I believe. And I was thinking of picking that one up because it sounds like it will also be in that spooky kind of mood for me. I'm also looking at some urban fantasy, maybe, something with paranormal creatures, that sort of thing. I'm looking around, so if you have recommendations, feel free to pass them along my way. I hope you have a great TBR lined up for October. Until next time, happy reading.